Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Oklahoma Environmental Training Center's somewhat less formal webinar on Zoom called Hacking Your Water today. We want to thank you for devoting the next hour to this very important topic as presented through Rose State College. I'm Tamara Pratt, the Vice President of External Affairs here at the college, and I'll be your moderator for the next hour. We have wonderful speakers on deck today to share their experiences and knowledge. This, of course, is in response to the water system attack in Florida about a month ago. As many of you already know, a hacker remotely accessed the water supply in Oldsmar, Florida, and was able to change the amount of sodium hydroxide in the water. Luckily, an employee saw the changes and made corrections immediately. No harm came to the public. But of course, this doesn't diminish the issue or the need for more awareness and education around the issue. Our first presenter is Ian Anderson. He is with OG&E in the capacity of Manager of Enterprise Security. Ian is a frequent speaker at the OWPCC conference and cybersecurity issues, and today he'll be talking about industrial control systems, so we're very excited to have him. Our second presenter is Kevin Owens, Chief Technology Officer for Control Cyber Incorporated. Kevin serves as a member on the Standards Board for the American Water Works Association, and he'll be looking at the American Water Infrastructure Act of 2018 and why it matters here in Oklahoma to all of us. So our chat room is open. I hope that you, as you have thoughts, feedback, questions, you're going to utilize that chat feature. And at the end of our presentations, we'll be opening it up for Q&A with both our speakers and utilize your questions from that chat. So without further delay, let's begin our program with Ian Anderson of OG&E. Ian?
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind introduction, Tamara. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ian Anderson. I'm a manager of enterprise security at OG&E. Specifically, I focus on cybersecurity operations. And at OG&E, that means an integrated approach to cybersecurity. So we use IT, OT, cloud, all of it all falls within the realm of our enterprise security team. And today, Tamara asked me to come talk a little bit about the events at Oldsmar, Florida. Just a quick background on me. I spent a few years working for the city of Oklahoma City. I was involved with the Oklahoma City water utility, the water side, wastewater a little bit, transmission, distribution, all that good stuff. And so now in my current capacity at OG&E, I've gotten to see kind of both sides of utilities, the electric side, the heavily regulated side that electric has, and then the less regulated side that water has. Now, with the events of Oldsmar, Florida, a lot of us are kind of looking for, the doom and gloom of the water environment. And I'm actually here to tell you, I'm very confident in our water capabilities. But as Tamara said, it doesn't take away from the need to talk about security, especially with industrial control systems. And I know a lot of organizations are starting to get more and more interested in defending their industrial control systems and bringing IT services and capabilities to bear. So I'm going to walk through a presentation that I gave at B-Sides Boston last year, talking about why fancy tools aren't going to save us, and really the path to industrial control system security is through relationships. So let me just share my screen. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, I got a thumbs up from one of the gyms, so I think we're good to go. All right. So I gave this presentation. It's what stickers, donuts, and listening can do for your ICS security program. Our agenda for today is we're going to talk about the problem with tools. So right now, cybersecurity is very focused on, do you have this tool? Do you have that tool? Like, we collect tools like they're baseball trading cards. And then what do we actually do with them? Well, there's a lot of challenges there. We're going to then hit why relationships matter. And then we'll follow up with some tips and tricks that we have done that I've done over the course of my career to improve ICS security in a measurable, tangible way that provides for long-term success. So just a quick disclaimer, I'm a cybersecurity guy. I'm not a process guy. And I recognize that. And I think that's actually turned into one of my superpowers, that I can go into a plant, I can go into a facility and be comfortable not having a clue what the heck I'm looking at or understanding it, right? It's an approach that has served me well, and I think it serves others well when you go into someone else's domain and then you realize that you're a tourist, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So As a cybersecurity manager, here is an eye chart that I'm regularly faced with. So this is the list of different vendors that are out there offering tools to solve my security problems. But the old saying, mo tools, mo problems. Because you cannot ask any organization, even one that is, fairly well funded like OG&E or even large organizations, to take this eye chart and say, okay, now here, go build a security program from it. Because now I have to figure out not only what all these organizations do, how they differ from each other, how they then fit into each other, and then how do they actually go solve real tangible business problems that I have, right? If we are pursuing something beyond checkbox security, we cannot just be an organization focused simply on deploying more and more stuff, right? So there is this little box here on the top left, because it's a new category that's kind of starting to get hot these days, and that's ICS OT. Now, several years ago, there was only probably 3 or 4 of these companies, but now they're starting to grow. And so, some of the big players like, Dragos is certainly one of the top, in my opinion. You have Nozomi, you have Clarity. Shoot, CyberX actually went out and got purchased by Microsoft, and Microsoft has recently announced that they are folding CyberX's product into their IoT security offering. Now, IoT is very different than ICS, but we do see this kind of this pivot by larger vendors to say, hey, there's this whole world of computing out there that I do not currently have any sort of solution around. And so we're seeing these smaller OT companies get bought up and then repurposed for things maybe even outside of the traditional OT landscape. So we go back here and we say, wow, there is just so much in this. I grab a new copy of this every single year. In fact, this is now version 2.5 of this eye chart, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the true takeaway, in my opinion, is there is no tool coming to save us. We cannot rely upon security vendors. We cannot rely upon security technologies to solve. It doesn't mean we can't use them to help us, but we cannot rely upon them to solve our problems. So if we're truly going to build a defensible industrial control system environment, what do we need to do? Well, first off, we need to stop trying to imprint our IT processes and thoughts into an OT environment, because they are very different in a lot of ways, in a lot of meaningful ways. We need to actually maybe pivot and say, okay, instead of trying to make OT look like IT, what are some of the things about OT that make it different, that make it more defensible? So I've seen this time and time and time again. An OT shop, you have plant owners, manufacturing lines, whatever. Their job is to produce X widget. If you're at OG&E, that could be we're generating electrons and shipping them to your house. If you're at a factory, it's producing, a component or a product. If you're at a refinery, it's making gas. It's, those are the processes that actually matter, because that's the product the company sells. Anything that you do to disrupt or hurt that process is going to take away from the value of security. So for instance, we're here to talk about water, right? If cybersecurity comes in and hurts the ability for a water treatment plant to produce water and get it into the clear well and then off into the system, then security is going to be a threat to the water system itself. And if that's how we're being, good luck getting people to advocate and allow you to come into their environment. OT has been around for a long, long time. It's routine to see servers, PLCs, RTUs, all these different devices in an OT environment that have been around for 10, 15, 20 years. I think some of them can now buy alcohol at a lot of plants. And what's great about the OT folks is they have as long a memory as the age of their equipment. And what I mean by this is, I was working at the city of Oklahoma City, and I made a reference to, hey, like, how about we patch this or upgrade this or whatever? And the OT guy, the operator, looked at me and says, that's pretty brave coming from a group that can't even figure out how to keep my email server up. And I'll tell you, like, that one cuts deep, because they're right. I mean, how many outages has IT caused over time? and they remember it. Any sort of outage directly and negatively impacts their service offering. Plant managers are typically paid by uptime, or like they have incentives to maintain uptime. So any threat to that is going to, is going to be a problem. IT security, we often like to fill the gaps, but OT is different. OT, it doesn't necessarily, how to explain this? OT isn't as extensible, or at least not yet, because remember, we're trying to pour security into environments that have been around for a long, long time. And so while security kind of likes to nudge itself in between different systems, different parts of the environment, OT doesn't necessarily lend itself to being as easily malleable as like an enterprise environment. And I think a lot about this statement that came from the Industrial Control System Cyber Kill Chain. It was written by Mike Asante and Rob Lee. And Mike Asante, rest in peace. He was a wonderful and amazing man, did a lot for our community. But they wrote this seminal paper about saying, what does it take to attack a industrial control system? And they turned the discussion to what are the benefits of OT? And this line, by understanding the inherent advantages of a well-architected industrial control system network, and by understanding adversary attack campaigns against ICS, security personnel can see how defense is doable. What that really means is use some of the features of ICS itself against the attackers. ICS is very static. ICS is well known. ICS is typically monitored 24/7, far more than enterprise environments. There's a lot of positive going on in OT, but we allow things like the Oldsmar, Florida event to say, oh, IT's in danger, critical infrastructure is in danger. And I categorically reject that. The Oldsmar, Florida thing, I think the biggest danger that can come from the Oldsmar, Florida event is that we try to simplify security in OT environment and do a little bit of asset owner shaming. Because yes, was a mistake made? Sure. How long had that mistake existed? Well, where was IT? Where was the organization? Right? I mean, it all just kind of falls upon the asset owner there at the end of the day. And I don't know if that's necessarily fair, because the asset owners have very different goals in terms of making sure that their systems stay up. So you notice I tried, we're trying to, talk about what are the different roles that exist here. You very much have to approach IT or OT security as a team sport. So you need IT in there because frankly, these OT environments are no longer part of isolated or air-gapped environments. They're very much a part of the larger ecosystem and environment of the organization, or at times interconnectedness with other entities. So you have to have IT. You have to have OT because again, they're the ones that actually know what's going on and why these things matter and how things actually work. And then management has to be very involved because that's where resources come from. IT and OT don't decide how much money you're going to spend on personnel or tools or any of the things that you need to create this defensible environment. Management does that. So if you don't have an active and engaged management that's interested in security, you're already behind the power curve. But I want us to really focus more on how do we start to develop relationships with OT? Because at the end of the day, if OT is uncomfortable with you bringing in some of your services, capabilities, or just your presence alone, you're going to have a bad time. So what can we do as resource, I don't want to say poor, but resource restricted entities that can start to develop relationships and partnerships that can be leveraged to build more defensible environments? Well, first off is field trips. And I know this sounds silly, but this is one of the most important things that we do. And in fact, this is probably one of the most negative impacts we've had via COVID. I cannot send my teams out to the plants now easily. And we would monthly go out to the plants, if only to say hi, if only to drop some stuff off. And I've got some other cool things that we do here in a little bit, but get out of your office, go see the folks out at the facility. When I worked at the city of Oklahoma City, driving up and down the Otoko pipeline, I got more information and intelligence from those dudes out in the field than I would have ever gotten sitting downtown. So if you are interested in OT, got to get to where the users are. So if you're going to go out there though, be mindful they have day jobs. So is the plant in an outage? Is there something going on? Is there construction going on? Are there, is it a good time? Be very conscious that when you show up, you are a tourist. And even if you're no longer a tourist, you're certainly a visitor, and you can create problems for the OT folks because they kind of have to manage you once you're there. So some of these environments are very dangerous, and that safety is a primary goal of theirs. So making sure that you show up in a way where the conditions are safe, that they have time, that you're not creating a burden just by being there. So the reverse works as well. So we security guys tend to go to some conferences from time to time. There is a amazing OT security conference in Miami, Florida in January. And I'll tell you, it's called S4, and I highly recommend you going if you can get the funding and stuff. There's so much good information. But a pure power move, bring one of your OT folks with you. So we did this with one of our plant managers, and now guess what? We got a buddy. We got a buddy that's in the plant that can help us understand problems that we see, can help us connect with the right people. It was such an easy lift for us to just get one more body out there. And I'll tell you, no one's going to turn down Miami in January. And it's beyond security. Like, one of the things I really love about OT and our folks out in the field is that, it's way more than just like a 9-to-5 grind. Like, our linemen are out there, like when a storm happens or an event happens, our linemen get out there and they work their butts off and to try and get people's power back. They are a really proud and amazing collection of people. I'm blessed to get to know them. And they do so much stuff beyond just computing. And so one of the things that we do is we try to get involved with stuff that they got going on. So this image that you have is our annual lineman rodeo. It's when all the different linemen come up and they compete against each other. And what do we do there? We don't pitch security. We basically run one of these little booths that you see here on the right. We hand out candy and let their kids shoot Nerf guns. We have our enterprise security banner so they know who we are, but it's not a security thing. This is them. This is their event. We're just there to support them. And so what we do in this is we start to normalize just our presence in a way that, in a good way. Like, we want to build this positive image attribution. Not only like they're kind of fun events, but we participate in things like the confined space training and stuff that they do. So each plant has a confined space rescue team, and they get together and do training and compete against each other. And we're there too, in almost identical capacity. We're there just to be their friends, to hang out, to, just be present. Again, we want them to see our faces and not groan because, oh God, it's cybersecurity. So what are some other things that we do? Again, we try to extend ourselves outside of just cybersecurity. So we hold an annual annual kind of conference to bring some of these people together. And we do things like we'll bring the Oklahoma Highway Patrol bomb dogs out. And then we'll invite them, we'll invite the guys out, and OHP will actually blow up some stuff for us. And you want to get field guys interested in what you're doing, promise them explosives, and they will definitely show out for that. So I think this is probably one of our top attended functions that we've ever done. So, and another benefit of this is we have now created a partnership with Oklahoma Highway Patrol. So if there's ever any sort of bomb or any sort of problem at one of our facilities, it's not the first time these dogs have been around there, or the officers. And so we feel that we can respond better to a crisis because we've done a little bit of legwork up front. Okay, so now to the really fun part. When you go out, when you meet with these guys, bring donuts. Bring donuts. I mean, it is such a simple, easy thing. A dozen donuts cost you like $10 maybe. You bring a box of donuts, I promise you people will be happy. And you leave these donuts in the break room and you don't ask for anything else. You don't say, hey, I'll give you this if you promise to quit using USB drives. No strings attached. You're just there to be their partner. But remember, donuts are good for break rooms. Donuts are not good for control rooms or trucks. So what we do is we buy big old bags of candy. And here's a true pro move. Start remembering what plant and what operator likes what candy. Because when someone shows up with something you really like and it makes you feel so special, what does that do for your relationship? Right? It sends it through the roof. And so we kind of keep a list of like, hey, so-and-so operator is on shift today and we're going out there, so we better bring a bag of Twizzlers. And it's almost like a Pavlov's dog reaction when we show up and they see like the candy in hand and they get excited. I'm telling you, if you have operators that are excited to see you, then you're winning. Because when they're excited to see you, they will share all sorts of stuff that's going on. And as a security guy, that's really good to know. I can go fix some things. I can go help them. I can remove roadblocks. There's a lot of power I can do. And also a little kind of fun, quick story about these puppy dog donuts. So we get one of these weird donuts each time we go out, and none of these linemen or operators want to take the puppy dog donut just because they don't want to get made fun of. But what we do is we bring like a Yeti cup or some really nice piece of swag we've gotten, and we give that to whoever has the guts to take the puppy dog donut, right? And so it turns into a reward and a joke, and like it has this kind of like self-feeding effect, in terms of your relationship with the entire group. So I'll finish this slide up on swag, stuff we all get. So if you are an IT person, you know all about swag. If you're a security person, you really know about swag. You go to a conference, you're just like, they dump it on you. Guys out of the plants don't get that. They don't get the cool security stuff sometimes. So we always say, just give me a whole box of swag. And then we take it out to the plants and like, just give it to them, right? I don't need any more Splunk t-shirts, I promise. But one of the things that, so we've actually built that philosophy into our deals where we say, hey, we're going to buy a product or renew a service. Have your marketing team throw in a box of swag and just include that in it. And they will happily do it. Like that's what they do. So you get a box of swag to give out, you get a tool, everyone wins. Okay. Kind of starting to wrap up. We're big on coins. I know a lot of organizations are big on coins. Coins are something that we've used, that OG&E uses a lot. So each year we have a safety coin that we hand out, and it's just a reminder. In fact, I actually have mine right here. I always keep it with me. So I've got my safety coin. It's a reminder of how important safety is. Everyone has the right to get to go home at the end of the day in the same condition that they came to work in. So we're very, very, very serious about safety. And so we wanted to extend some of that thought in cybersecurity. So we started looking at some other coins that we knew about. You have the beer ISAC, which is always kind of a fun one. At the city of Oklahoma City, we did a coin that we would hand out to people that did an extraordinary job. And then at OG&E, we also have a coin. So these coins are just like these fun little tokens of appreciation. When you see something good, you can hand a coin. And that coin will sit on their desk or in a rack or something. And what always happens is someone will say, hey, where'd you get that coin? And then it becomes a competition. And then they want to partner as well. Okay, now to probably the main part of my presentation, and I'll try and wrap this up as quickly as I can because I know I'm about out of time. Talent development is one of the most important and hardest things that we do in cybersecurity. So make sure that you are looking at your current personnel and finding opportunities to start developing talent both ways. Take your OT folks, train them up on IT security, give them opportunities to learn and expand. IT folks, if they're interested in OT, nurture that, right? Going outside and hiring, third-party OT security stuff is hard because there's just not a ton of people that do it. The numbers are getting better, but we're still a ways away. And don't be afraid to deputize people in terms of like giving them access to your security tools. If you are a security person, it makes those people better with knowledge. Little reminders. We talked a little bit about stickers and swags. We do mouse pads, we do desk mats. We don't do it a ton because we just don't have a ton of money for that kind of stuff. But we even do little things like we color the cables that run our security tools a separate color than everything else. Because if you go out to one of our plants, you'll see a run of Ethernet cable, but only one of those cables will be green. And what that means is that's security. And green is correlates with one of the vendors that we use, but it is just like one of those simple little reminders that security is always there. And I think that that helps with our communication. Some pitfalls that I've seen in the past. One, be aware of transactional relationships, because your operators, just anyone you work with, is going to see how empty and vapid those relationships are. If you have to have something in return for something, then like that's purely transactional, and you will not develop long-term trust. Face-to-face is always better than phone calls, and phone calls are always better than emails. It's hard to do with COVID, but that's the order that you need to focus on. Get your FaceTime in with these people. They're human beings, and relationships are developed face-to-face. Remember that memories last as long as ICS systems do. If you break them, if you hurt their process, they're going to remember. And I've been a part of a security team that, we've performed a scan, and it had negative impact on some PLCs, and we still catch hell for it from time to time. So they don't forget. They shouldn't forget, because this is their livelihood. And none of this is a simple function. It takes time to earn credibility. However, the payout is tremendous. So first things first, they return your calls. If you get people returning your calls, you're winning. They show up to your events, you're winning. They smile when you show up, you're winning. These are all the things that we need, because what we really need is people to let us know when things get weird. We want to be one of the first folks that they call when things get weird, when things get hard. And by driving the relationship aspect, we get that. So if we were to try to tie this back to the Oldsmar, Florida, if IT had a strong relationship with OT, they were likely going to be aware at some level of what kind of remote access technology are you using. But since they likely didn't have a relationship, and I can't speak for them, that's why they probably didn't know, because like that's a whole separate world. And they said, well, that's OT's problem. Well, no, it's all of our problems. So drive relationships, and I promise you good things will come for your ICS security program. So thanks.
Ian, thank you so much. This has been a very interesting perspective that I wasn't quite anticipating, and I really like it. Well, focusing on the human factor, because we have humans running our systems, and we can't forget that with all of the high technology that's available to us, that it still comes back to people. And that's only built by if I have a friend, if I'm a friend with you and I eat your dog donut, bottom line. So appreciate it. Moving on to our next presenter is Kevin Owens. I gave you a little brief descriptor of Kevin's background. I'm not going to reiterate it again, but let's just say he's been very busy lately. You may have already seen him on Channel 9 most recently, and he certainly has a national presence. So Kevin, I will be quiet and let you begin.
Thanks, Tamara. So one of the big things that we're here to listen about is AWIA, America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018. So there was a big shift in focus to an all hazards approach, looking at not just natural disasters like floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, but also looking at physical and cyber attacks. So if we look back a little bit with history, back in November 1941, Hoover saw that water was critical to the nation's economy and how vulnerable it was. And he published this in the American Water Works Journal in November. And the following month was the attack on Pearl Harbor. The attack in Oklahoma City that you probably all remember it back in 1995, that led to a presidential directive focused on protecting critical infrastructure. After the attacks in 2001, there was the Bioterrorism Act of 2002 that came out requiring a vulnerability assessment of drinking water, but it was one and done. Do it and then move on. So after the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, then they started to get malware focused on control systems. One of those was Stuxnet in 2010. And then there was an attack on a water system in the United States that was reported by Verizon in 2016, which led to the updating of the Bioterrorism Act, OEA. So looking at that update, Section 2013 of that act takes the vulnerability assessment and moves it to a greater risk and resilience assessment, going from terrorism or an intentional act to all hazards. In the old Bioterrorism Act, you would submit your vulnerability assessment to the EPA. Now they just want to see that you send a letter that it was done. Emergency response plan, now, again, they just want to see that you've updated it and submitted a letter to the EPA. So compliance deadlines, we're already halfway through. So the larger cities have already accomplished this. We're halfway through the medium-sized ones. And now it's the smaller cities, of which there are a lot, over 8,000 across the country, in this size of 3,300 to 50,000. One of the big changes is this cybersecurity threat. So back in the old days, it was a very isolated system, control systems. I was building these over 25 years ago, very isolated system. But as technology changed, people wanted to start having access to that data. And so now that perimeter fence line is no longer the edge once you have that connectivity, because that connectivity is going to increase your exposure, because everybody wants access to that data. They want to see how much power are people using? How can I bill for it? How much water are people using? How can I bill for it? So, and you look at how quickly a compromise takes. A compromise of a computer can usually occur in mere minutes or less. Here we've got most compromises took place in just minutes, and only 3% are discovered as quickly. Most of them are not discovered for months, and many times that's 6 months to a year before they actually notice a presence. There are lots of standards and guidance that are out there. AWWA creates a lot of these in conjunction with ANSI. So G430 looks at security practices. So security practices for your overall company. What is the culture? How are you taking security? As Ian was talking, how are you taking it? Is it part of your culture? J100 is the risk and resilience assessment, and it kind of walks you through those steps. G440 has to do with emergency preparedness. And these first two are actually in compliance with the DHS Safety Act, which actually protects you for a liability insurance if you're attacked by a nation state actor. There's other guidance that's out there for free. All these things you can find on awwa.org, but some guidance on cybersecurity, process control systems, as well as a cybersecurity assessment tool. I helped design that. It's available on their website for free. And you can go through and look at all these things. Look at connections between your IT and OT side. Do they exist? How are they protected? How are they secured? So when you go through this, phase one, you start looking at where are we at right now? So you start digging out your policies and procedures. Do things like that exist? And you start performing that gap analysis. Creating an asset inventory is very helpful to understand what are my important critical assets and how can I have a baseline and restore some of these, especially after like a ransomware attack. So now we're looking at the risk and resilience assessment. So some of the things that a utility has to assess is looking at malevolent acts and natural hazards. So again, that's that all hazards approach. We're looking at resilience of the pipes, physical barriers, source water. That's a very important thing. Water collection and intake, pre-treatment, treatment, storage, everything that has to do with it. But also the thing that most people don't understand is electronic computers and automated systems and connections to IT. That gets important to be assessed and looked at. What are the monitoring practices of the system? And that's more than just water quality. That's also your cybersecurity, your incident detection systems. Financial infrastructure. In the event that happened in 2016, there was a theft of customer data. 1.5 million customer accounts, their financial data was taken. These are people who do automatic payment every month. So your name, your address, your credit card, or your banking information, all that was grabbed. So that's why the OEA, they're looking at what's the financial infrastructure of the system. And many times that's not the water guy's domain. So that's a separate system in the IT side, probably in the city system, intertwined with a number of other systems. It's important to look at that. Looking at storage, handling of various chemicals by the system. Do you have chlorine? Is it liquid? Is it gas? And so there's a number of tools that are out there. Again, here's a list of some of the different standards and some of the associated manuals that go with it, as well as a number of other guidances like this. I mentioned the cybersecurity guidance and assessment tool, as well as WARN, which is the Water and Wastewater Agency Response Network. So the J100 process, it's a 7-step process of going through, looking at your assets. What are my critical assets? What are the threats against those assets? What are the consequences if something were to occur? Is it going to lead to injuries, fatalities? Is my system going to be offline for a period of time? Vulnerability analysis. So these critical assets, how are they being protected? What weaknesses exist, whether that's in the facilities, whether it's in policies or procedures or personnel behavior. And then threat analysis, here's where we look at what's the likelihood of these events happening. You know, if you're in Kansas, odds are very low that you're going to have a hurricane, so now you don't have to worry about hurricanes. And then risk and resilience management is the last step. And here's where we're looking at and balancing those costs and understanding, is there a net benefit or cost ratio? That's where we're doing those calculations. Now, I mentioned source water earlier. Looking at the source water and seeing if there's events that could infect it are important, whether that is a flood or it could be the complete opposite, a drought, like the Oklahoma drought back in 2012. I mentioned WARN earlier. There's agreements that you can make, especially if you are a smaller water community system, to help if you don't have enough resources, if you don't have enough people. How can I interconnect or have agreements for people, for equipment, if an emergency were to occur. There's other guidance for tribal water systems, as well as interstate. So if you are alongside a border, perhaps in Oklahoma, is there a connection into Texas that you have to worry about, for instance? And so there are a lot of these different standards that I talked about, and they all interrelate with each other. It's also important to look at physical security. What are the access points into that building? What are the access points into that equipment that's out in the field? What are the approaches? And are there any cameras that are in use, or any intrusion detection if somebody opens up a cabinet out in the field? Looking at the architecture review, seeing where those connection points are, whether that's remote connections, like what happened in Oldsmar, or whether that's connections into the IT enterprise systems. So you have the risk and resilience. So you've looked at all your risks, and you start looking at what are the ways to protect against it, and do those things balance out. And so in the end, you have a report, and you look at those vulnerabilities, and you figure out, these are the priority one ones that I need to fix these at a bare minimum. Priority two, these are going to have significant and immediate increase, but I'm not going to do these till I knock off priority one. These are going to cost me a little bit more in time, resources, money. Priority three, now we're looking at, I'm really trying to increase cybersecurity in both the enterprise and ICS networks. And priority four, this is if you're protecting against a nation state. You will have knocked off all the other priorities here, so odds are many of you won't get to this unless you are in one of those critical places where your customer is one of those critical needs. Phase three, we're looking at the emergency response plan. So based on what we find in the risk and resilience assessment, you need to develop and update that emergency response plan. So you want to look at ways that you can improve the security and resilience of that system. Is there ways that you can detect that event faster or better? Do you have plans and procedures in case of some of these events that you have brought up in your risk and resilience assessment that need to be addressed? They weren't in your plan. How can you do that? Because you're looking at ways to lessen the impact of that event. So in the end, you have to put a certification letter into the EPA, which has your community water system ID number, the date that it was certified, and whether you were doing a review, updating, or revision of your risk and resilience assessment or your emergency response plan. Now, I know you're saying, well, what happens if I don't do these things? Well, under the utility is subject to enforcement by the EPA, and for each letter, they can fine a penalty of $25,000 per day, both for if you never did the RRA or you never did the ERP. Each of those is a $25,000 fine per day. Now, again, that is up to. So looking at those compliance deadlines, as I said earlier, we are in the midst of those 8,000 plus systems across the country right now. If you are a smaller water utility, like the numerous rural water systems across Oklahoma, even though you do not have to submit something to the EPA, it is still a very, very good idea to go through some of these things, look at some of these things and address it. Because if something were to happen, you can't easily look upstream and say, hey, can you help me out? Because if you've got problems, they most likely have problems as well. So that's the wrap up. We've got time now for some questions. Sorry, I went through that a little fast. I was just trying to make it so that we had some time at the end.
Kevin, while we're waiting for the chat to fill, I have a question. And this, the old rule of lawyering, you never ask a question you don't know the answer to. And I'm openly admitting I don't know the answer to this question. But
Okay.
based on your experience, I mean, this is what you do for a living. You help people with these issues in the utility sector. How prepared is Oklahoma from a utility perspective? And we're ignoring Ian and OG&E and people like that. We're talking about those smaller rural areas, which we know are prevalent in Oklahoma.
Unfortunately, so I've been looking at these systems for over 20 years, and the systems that I've assessed, 100% of the water systems have had malware present on it in one form or another. The only ones that haven't is the systems were completely isolated, or they were brand new and were not turned online yet. But I have seen malware present on way too many systems. And you have to understand the smaller water utility systems, it's not their fault. They lack a lot of the resources. For the cities, they are one of the leading sources of income, because they're putting bills out to everyone every month. But then that gets put back into the city coffers and divided up. First, fire and the police get their chunks. And then you've got, so you go down and, oh, we got to give some money to the water and wastewater area. So, getting funding for some of these organizations is difficult. There are some resources that are available, especially if you are trying to buy equipment. So if you are trying to purchase like backup generators, there's actually funding for that. The USDA is one resource for funding. They had over $1 billion of unused money last fiscal year because no one tapped into it and asked for it. Yeah. Doing cybersecurity assessments, there's not a lot of funding for that, but there's things that you can do. And that's why going through some of those resources, many of them that are freely available, go through these things, try and check these things on your own.
Well, I want to thank you both. Ian, do you have a comment? Because I see you popped your face back up, so that makes me think you have something to say.
Yeah, no, I mean, what Kevin's talking about, it's interesting. Like the big difference between the electric utility space and the water utility space is we are heavily regulated in all things, and especially around NERC CISSP. So we have a reliability organization, which is NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. Then we have our regional entities and all that stuff. And we have a set of standards, the NERC CISSP standards, that if we do not comply with, we face fines. And those fines have real teeth. So 2019, Duke Energy is one of the larger electric utilities in the nation, was fined $10 million for having poor cybersecurity. Now, to date, and Kevin, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that there's any sort of like mandated required standards for water systems in terms of cybersecurity. And that being the case, like the true challenge is, how do you get funding for something that isn't required? And I think the scarier challenge is, what happens when an event creates enough of a political enough political awareness saying, hey, why don't we make water look like electric? Because they're very different in a lot of very important, distinct ways. But they'll say, well, why don't we just make water look like electric? And now all of a sudden these other standards are going to come in. And so you really don't have the choice, right? So there is this kind of preemptive, like if we take care of our own, there's no need for regulatory action. However, like at what point does that become a real risk? And I think that these are some of the modern problems that water utility managers have to grapple with, and saying, am I going to be that first domino that kicks off, a true regulatory effort in that space, and to introduce required standards? I don't know, Kevin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the standards that are out there, like I was talking about the AWWA ones, they are not required. They are recommended, but not required.
Yeah.
So I'm currently updating the J100 right now, trying to put more things in there focused on cybersecurity, as well as ways for companies to easily assess these things and actually put numbers to it. Because if you're looking at, if I get hit with ransomware and the system gets taken offline, what is it going to cost me to recover? And so you put a price tag on it, even if it's a small water utility or a small organization, you put a price tag on it of like $100,000. Now, Ian, you know that $100,000 for a ransomware recovery is nothing. I mean, odds are it's going to be much higher, but you put a number 100,000 in there and you say, or you can create a backup of that system and have a plan for how to restore that.
Yeah.
And you could put something in place, work with your IT guys.
Yeah.
And if you have to hire somebody outside, it might cost you $5,000. And I had a city go, Kevin, it wasn't $5,000, it cost us $35,000. I go, $35,000, what did you do? Oh, we're completely upgrading our server and all of our engineering laptops and all of our computers, and that's why it's costing us $35,000. And I go, okay, $35,000 versus removing $100,000 in risk, annual risk. And they go, oh yeah, it's still a great deal.
Well, so, I mean, it gets down to I thought your financial infrastructure discussion was really interesting, because I think that this is something that all sides of utilities face. So the capital constraints and O&M constraints that utilities face. So if it has to do with like subscriptions, personnel, the day-to-day stuff, the O&M, that goes directly onto customer bills. So what I'll tell you is at OG&E, we are incredibly sensitive to the customer bill. Right. And we have very clear, guidance from leadership that we need to protect the customer bill. It's really important for us to keep that low. And so we're challenged to find solutions that don't necessarily have, negative O&M impact. And so, but things like rate cases, things like, I know the city council for the city of Oklahoma City approved a rate hike a few years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago. And that money went direct to infrastructure upgrades, cybersecurity upgrades. Like what utilities really need is support. And I think reach out to your corporation commission, reach out to your city council, say, hey, this stuff is important. The city of Norman had a breach, not necessarily of their control system, but of their billing system. And so customer utility billing was exposed. And frankly, that announcement was made and then it went into a black hole, right? So no one's talking about it anymore. So what is required is continuous sunlight on these problems and forcing leaders to discuss and say, okay, how are we going to defend against this? How are we going to recover? Because at the end of the day, politicians and city management still have to make this decision of okay, do I add another public safety officer, or do I spend this money on a blinking box or doing something that may or may not happen? Politically speaking, it's always good to add public safety. And I know our public safety departments really need additional manpower as well. So what are that's the nice thing I like about required standards is you don't really have a choice at that point.
Well, the reason why they most likely will never be required is if you're looking at NERC CISSP,
Yeah.
You get an outage, it affects other communities around you.
It can.
Okay.
Yeah.
You take a look at the cascading blackout around the Great Lakes. When you look at water, you are affecting only one small water system. What happens there isn't going to happen on another water system that's right next door.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and actually, if you really look at NERC, NERC only applies to what's called the bulk electric system. It does not refer to the distribution management system. So the grid that connects to your house is actually not covered by the regulatory authority of NERC. It's just the big, tall transmission lines and the big, large power plants. That represents, and we can get into the nuance of that, but no, I agree, right? Like water is far more a distributed resource than, if we're comparing the utilities.
Gentlemen, I'd like to jump in here. I'm sorry. It's a great dialogue, and I
sorry.
really appreciate it. But we've got one comment on the chat and one question that I want to get to.
Okay.
Polly Edwards wrote that Homeland Security grant cycle has just opened. It's a huge initiative on cybersecurity. Local or small systems would have to apply through the state. So that's great information. Thank you, Polly.
Yeah, there's $1.9 billion that just got released. So that is an open cycle right now. And if you are in a rural area or a tribal area, odds are significantly higher that you will get the funding that you're looking for, including for cybersecurity.
Thank you, Kevin. That's good information. And this next question is for you. Also, well, let me follow it up. Stephanie asks, what state agency do they apply through for that Homeland Security grant?
That I'm not sure. I will have to find out, and I'll let Tamara know.
Okay, thank you. We'll get back with you.
Polly says Oklahoma Homeland Security.
Probably, I would assume it would be Oklahoma Office of Homeland Security, but you don't want to make an assumption, right? You know how that goes.
Yeah.
So the final question that we have for today is how prevalent are the remote access systems that were compromised at Oldsmar? And how do you typically recommend that organizations protect such systems? Kevin?
So at Oldsmar, the credentials was one thing that was compromised. So there's a website that's out there called www.haveibeenpwned.com. And so the credentials for that person, their username and password, was for sale on the dark web and had been for some time. So that's what was used in this particular incident. So routinely changing your password, you hear IT say it, hey, that's a good thing to do, every 90 days at least. When it comes to the OT side, I have seen people go, I've got my same password that I've had for 20 years. And I go, what is it? He goes, enter. And I go, the word enter? And he goes, no, just push the enter key. It's null. And I was like, wow, okay. So
you know what's crazy is that's actually more secure than some of the other passwords because no hash crackers are looking for a null entry.
Well,
okay, but is that good? Is that good practice though?
No, of course not.
We all agree that
it's an interesting component of the cracking. But
yeah, and Oldsmar also had all their systems were running Windows 7, which Ian could probably tell you is not the best thing to continue running because it's out of date. But again, it's resources. Having those resources. The guy who was IT for the water sector was also IT for the wastewater sector, was also IT for the city, but his day job was be the city manager. Okay, so all those IT skills were just side little things. And one way to secure those systems, if you are doing remote access, is you look at multi-factor authentication. There are ways out there, and there are companies that produce a simple solution for $5 per month per user for multi-factor authentication. That's if you go sign in your username and your password, boom, it puts a pin to your smartphone and say, yes, allow this access. If they would have had that, their system would have been secured.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Ian, so much for your time today. We are out of time. We're right at 11 o'clock. I want to be respectful of everyone's 1 hour time frame. Thank you again so much, everyone. Thanks to our presenters. I'm going to give a virtual applause. It was a very interesting dialogue, and I really appreciate it. We'll be doing more of this in the future. Thank you for your time. On behalf of the Oklahoma Environmental Training Center, we appreciate you being here and hope you have a fantastic remainder of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Have a wonderful day. Be safe.